Join us to talk about this right now, Congresswoman Diane Black from Tennessee. Congresswoman, how are you today?
I am great. How are you, Cam?
I am fantastic. I appreciate you joining us on the program. What is going on in the House chamber this afternoon?
Oh, this is another political stunt, just like we saw before. You know, if they really wanted to be serious about their legislative initiative, they could file a discharge petition and bring this to the floor. But this is all about getting press, and who knows what's going to come next. I hope that we don't have the same nonsense that we had before we left out of here this past break. But this is all political stunt once again.
So one of the things that your colleagues on the other side of the aisle are saying is that because of the inaction of Congress, thousands of Americans have died since you all recessed. I'm curious, Congressman, have you heard any of these gun control supporters in the House of Representatives today say anything at all about the decline in federal weapons prosecutions under the Obama administration? Have they talked about that at all?
I haven't heard anything. I will fully admit that I haven't been on the floor listening to all the things that they've been saying. But we know it's the same old mantra that they've had before. Listen, if they were really serious about the number of deaths that have occurred because of the use of weapons, they would just look to what's happening in Chicago, where it is the strongest restrictions on guns anywhere, and yet we see that young lives are being taken every day there. But they're not serious about this issue. And so this is a way, once again, for them to be able to get a little bit of attention on the floor, but not really to solve the problem of what happens in these cities where we see tragically many young lives are being lost.
Absolutely. And, and that is the thing, Congressman. I don't want anybody to get the impression that this is not an issue and that gun owners or conservatives don't care about this issue. But rather than, hearing politicians say we need to do something, I think you have Americans, particularly those good people living in bad neighborhoods across this country, who are saying, no, do something that works for once.
Absolutely. Let's address mental health issues. Let's address radical Islamic terrorism. These are, if we look back at the tragic shootings that have happened in these mass shootings, both of those issues are what caused these. And then we can also look at the daily loss of lives. And this is the lack of dealing with this issue in these neighborhoods where we see that crime is high, where there is a lack of education. And rather than dealing with the true issue, they would rather just bring this up and have try to have an emotional ploy to people without really dealing with it. Look, none of us want violent criminals to have guns. None of us want someone on the airplane that has not been vetted. But we've got a terrorist watch list, and if they're on that list, they should not have a weapon. But the list that's currently on the no-fly area, it must be looked at because there are a lot of problems with it. It's error-prone. And so let's deal with that. Let's look at how we can make sure that we put measures in place to make sure that people that shouldn't have guns don't have them. But we're not going to take Americans' Fifth Amendment right to due process away.
And you'd think with all of the IT workers for Hillary Clinton who pleaded the Fifth before the House Oversight Committee yesterday, you'd think that it would see Democrats more supportive of the Fifth Amendment today.
Well, you would think so, but, it is almost laughable when you see that there are a few of the Democrats who agree with us on this. You also see the ACLU. How often do you see the Republicans and the ACLU arguing on the same side of the issue? And the ACLU actually agrees with us on the issue of the no-fly list and the Fifth Amendment right to due process.
Absolutely. And look, this is one of those, and you know this as well, Congressman. I mean, the issues that they're talking about today are the issues that they think poll well among American voters, right? In a lot of cases, we're talking about people who don't own firearms. They don't know what the gun laws currently are. And this is an argument that says, well, doesn't this just sound like common sense to you? Suspected terrorists shouldn't be allowed to buy guns. But that doesn't, again, explain the fact that your presence or the presence of a name on a watch list, that doesn't mean that they're actually a suspected terrorist. As you say, these lists are error-prone. There was the case of the Stanford doctoral student who the FBI checked a wrong box, and she got put on this list, and it took her a decade to get off. Now, she wasn't a suspected terrorist. It was just a bureaucratic mistake, and yet it took years for that mistake to get rectified.
The list is flawed. The list has a number of flaws in it. And we cannot allow this list with all these flaws in it to take our Fifth Amendment right to due process away. I actually have my husband, whose name is a very common name, that was prohibited from buying a ticket over the line. He had to go to the airport. And it wasn't until one of the agents there at the airport said, because he flies a lot, hey, listen, why don't you put your middle name in there? This may take you off that list, and it actually did. But for several years, he did not realize why. He tried making calls. Nobody could give him an answer to it. So there are case after case. I have people telling me these situations that they've been in where they couldn't get their name taken care of. It caused them to not be able to, as I say with my husband, be able to just get on an airplane, buy a ticket at home, get on the airplane. He was stopped in airports, patted down, and the whole bit. So we see that this is a small process, and until we fix that process, we cannot allow this to affect people's due process.
Again, we're talking with Congresswoman Diane Black, a Republican from Tennessee. You can follow her on Twitter at Rep. Diane Black. You know, the other aspect of this argument, Congresswoman, is that if an individual who's on this list is automatically so dangerous that they should not be allowed to buy a firearm, should they be allowed to rent a car? Should they be allowed? Frankly, should they be allowed to live, in freedom if they're that dangerous? We saw that attack in France, right, where a individual rented a truck, drove it into a crowd of people, murdered dozens of individuals. If these individuals on the watch list, again, need to have certain rights restricted, why stop with the second? Why should we let them vote, Congresswoman, if they're that dangerous?
You make some very, very good points. And it only takes us back once again to say if this list is really serious, then we have to use the list as it's meant to be. But let's make sure that it's serious before we take someone's rights of whatever away, whether it's to purchase a weapon or drive a car or to vote. And that list does need to have some cleanups on it. But I would go back to the theatrics of this again. If they were really serious and they wanted to do something, they could bring a discharge petition to the floor. And they would have a bill, and we would have to consider it. The reason why they haven't done that is because they know full well it wouldn't pass. It did not pass over in the Senate, and it is not going to be taken up by the president, but this is all theatrics.
So explain, if you can, the discharge petition process, because I know a lot of folks are not familiar with the intricacies of how this actually works. What would they need to do to bring this up for a vote? We have that as a privilege within our House of Representatives, where we can bring a bill to the floor. You just need to get X number of members to sign it. And they certainly have enough members to sign that discharge petition if that's really what they wanted to do. And when they do that, and they actually bring that petition to the floor and demand a vote on a particular bill, that must be considered within 3 days. And so there's an up or down vote on it within 3 days, or any other procedures such as tabling and so on, which is a part of our regular process. But there is a process for that, and they just need to have enough members on that side of the aisle that if they wanted to do that, they could bring that discharge petition with that bill. You know, I call this political theater, and that's really what this is. And what's so disheartening, again, Congressman, is that these are real issues. And there are real Americans out there who are affected by violent crime every day. And yet we see these political games being played in Washington, D.C. And it's amazing to me that some of your colleagues still don't understand why so many Americans distrust what's going on in Washington, D.C., why we have a lack of faith that members of Congress are actually working for us, because we see these we see these acts of political theater take place.
Absolutely, and it is so disappointing to me because I really consider myself a serious legislator. And when these kinds of things happen, and what happened with the sit-in, I was so embarrassed. Here we are in an institution that should be honored and never degraded the way they did with bringing food on the floor. Look, you can't even bring a drink onto the floor at regular time. The parliamentarian will come, or the security will come and say, either you remove yourself from the floor, we can't talk on the telephone on the floor, there's a decorum, and there's a reason for that. And to see the kinds of things that have been going on with this just really disappoint me, and it disappoints me because, once again, it looks like to the public we're just a bunch of buffoons that are playing games here. And yet there are real issues, there are real lives that are being lost where we need to sit down and talk about What's happening in these inner cities? Why is that occurring? How do we stop people who are radical Islamists from coming into our country, or those that are lone wolves from doing something that would harm a large number of people? How do we take care of mental illness? Let's talk about solutions, real solutions to the problem, rather than the actions that we're seeing.
So, what do you think the ultimate outcome of today's event is going to be? Just an attempt to get headlines, and I'm sure they'll get some folks talking about what they're doing. That it?
Yeah, it's a big yawn. Anybody that's watching the news network might see this, but it's a big yawn. It doesn't do anything. We don't accomplish anything. It takes time. It takes time away from legitimate discussion that takes place on legitimate legislation that we are considering right now. So it's a big waste of time, and it makes us look really inept by the American people.
Well, listen, I appreciate you taking a couple minutes out of your day to talk to us. Hopefully this was not a waste of time. And
not at all.
And if you do talk to any of your colleagues who are involved in this effort, please ask them why or if they are concerned at all about the decline in federal weapons prosecutions under this administration, because we are seeing this in Chicago. They are below the national average in federal weapons prosecutions. San Bernardino, California, the U.S. Attorney for the Central District of California, dead last in the nation right now in terms of federal weapons cases. And San Bernardino actually has a higher per capita homicide rate this year than Chicago. So why aren't we prosecuting these violent criminals? Why are they demanding more gun control laws rather than using the laws we have on the books right now?
Kim, I love your questions, and I am going to ask one of my colleagues that I have a good relationship with just that question.
I really do appreciate it. Congressman, thank you so much for everything that you do for the Second Amendment. We enjoyed talking with you at the NRA annual meeting, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do it again soon.
My pleasure. Thank you for what you do.
Well, thank you very much. Congressman Diane Black joins, Republican from Tennessee, talking about the gun control efforts in the House. They're not gun control efforts. Talking about the political theater taking place in Congress today.